I'm James Hughes, bioethicist and resident techno-progressive.
And I'm Nir Eisikovits, philosopher and resident Luddite.
And you're listening to Prosthetic Gods, an optimist and a grump on tech, a podcast where we explore the social, ethical, and political impacts of emerging technologies.
Dr. Hughes, top of the morning.
How are you, sir?
Good. Excited to talk about nuclear anxieties to start off the week.
I have to say, I started watching this on the plane and I got to the first 30 minutes and had to turn it off because of the various genres of horror. This is probably the closest to the one that lights up my amygdala. But I eventually steeled myself and got all the way through.
Yeah, so today on Prosthetic Gods, Jay and I are talking about nuclear war movies prompted by the recent House of Dynamite. But also a bit of a deep dive into the history of movies like this, like A Day After. So after you came back from the plane and finished up watching, what were your first impressions, Jay?
Well, as a meditation, it seems to be precisely designed for conversations like ours about the philosophical and historical implications of where we're at with nuclear war, nuclear preparedness, Golden Dome, etc. But as a movie, I don't know if it really worked that well. You know, it's basically three teases of the same series of events from different points of view. And it doesn't, it stops all, it continues to stop before the resolution of the nuclear crisis. I don't think, spoilers ahead. We're going to, do you feel comfortable spoiling this for?
I do.
Okay.
I'm a Grinch, remember?
Yeah. I mean, basically, this is the great first 30 minutes of a very good movie told three times. And those first 30 minutes are from the perspective of people who are in charge of detecting and attempting to shoot down the missile, and then the people who at Stratcom who are preparing the nuclear options for response, and then the president having to make the decisions. And I don't know that structure worked very well because there wasn't anything that was revealed in the second or third telling of the same series of events that really illuminated much about what was going on in the situation. It was all you still understood the sequence of events from the first 30 minutes.
Right.
So as far as that, I didn't think it worked that well. But the cast, fantastic. Idris Elba as president, Rebecca Ferguson as a central person in the first sequence, and Jared Harris as the Secretary of Defense, who I guess if we're into spoilers, again, spoilers ahead, Jared Harris at one point just commits suicide, which you don't realize in the first sequences that's
right.
happened, but
right. Yeah. So just to put everyone on the same page, the premise of the movie is that a launch is detected from somewhere, which we're not 100% sure where it's from, maybe North Korea. It's missed by our radar systems, and there's 18 to 20 minutes until impact on a city. It turns out that the city is likely to be Chicago. And then the three sequences are the sequences of what happens in those 20 minutes, the narrow decision window. I loved the structure, actually, and I thought that it emphasized the fact that, the whole point was that, holy shit, how do you make a decision like this in 18 minutes?
When you're all real people.
When you're all real people, exactly, which she did a good job of portraying in the few minutes before the 18 minutes.
Right.
And
that was beautiful,
yeah.
I thought, the detail. And that's what she's known for.
Yeah. And there's no resolution. I thought it was appropriate that there's no resolution because, it's a cliche, but what kind of resolution is there for, a nuclear exchange? So I think the kind of repeated structure, no ending thing, either people either love it or hate it. It does sound like, as you said, she intentionally made the movie to generate a conversation about the topic. And the interesting thing is that a conversation needed to be generated. And so, one thing to consider is that recently our anxieties have been all about AI, largely unrealistic, at least for the camp that looks at sort of absolute AI doom. That seems, I just can't take that seriously, not yet. And here's actual doom that's, the distance of one bad strategic move in Ukraine away, or one sort of careless procedure away, and we haven't been talking about it almost at all.
Well, I do think there's an important connection there because a lot of people in AI ethics have tried to extrapolate from nuclear strategy discussions and nuclear weapons and nuclear energy discussions about what the strategic implications of artificial intelligence are. And so just to rewind for a second, after World War II, there was this widespread revulsion on the part of people who think about things, oh my God, what have we done? And so there is a kind of absolutist moral response, which is we just should not be doing this, that this is the path to hell. And then the response of people like Herman Kahn, who wrote on thermonuclear war in 1960 and was working at the Rand Institute, was, yeah, but we're part of the Department of Defense and we have to figure out what to do in these circumstances and what the strategic implications are. And Herman Kahn argued, for instance, that the United States needed to prepare and harden our defenses so that we could, guarantee that we would smash any opponent who tried to hit us first. So he argued for the second strike capability. And while he was at Rand came up with the idea of mutually assured destruction, which then informed Dr. Strangelove, which was the comedic version of that in 1964, and Failsafe, which was the dramatic version of this situation in 1964. And I think that was the height of, of course, that was the Cuban Missile Crisis and that whole era of actual threats that we faced about nuclear war. We have continued to face those threats ever since, but the energy went out of nuclear disarmament campaigns with the 60s, I think. There hasn't been a serious nuclear disarmament campaign since then. And the conversation is more or less
the freeze campaign in the 80s was pretty serious. It wasn't a disarmament campaign. It was a sort of nuclear truce campaign.
That's right.
And was pretty influential. And talking about the 80s, another famous nuclear war movie was The Day After, which focused not so much like a House of Dynamite on the procedure, but on the aftermath of a full-on nuclear exchange between the U.S. and the Soviets. And apparently that movie scared the shit out of Reagan and was pretty significant in his kind of move towards more robust arms control talks.
Apparently, he also watched War Games, the Matthew Broderick, I think, was a movie about a kid hacking in and almost starting nuclear war.
Yeah.
And he was inspired by that to strengthen the cyber command structure over nuclear weapons.
Yeah.
But that comes into focus in this, the kind of the different procedures that are in place, but it all resolves at the end back to the sole authority of the president.
Yeah. Yeah, it is also an interesting sort of historical point about, presidents influenced by TV, especially since the movie is all about kind of, we'll talk about this more, but all about careful, competent decision-making. At least a Kathryn Bigelow movie, the House of Dynamite, you kind of can't help but admire the people making the decisions there. They don't seem like the type influenced by TV, but maybe it's not a terrible thing to sort of be moved and scared by TV, especially now that we have another president who's influenced by TV.
Yeah, maybe we could just get him to watch this. Change the course of history.
Yeah. Going back to the point that you made a little bit, the tech bros love to compare themselves and what they're making to the kind of stakes of making a nuclear weapon.
And to the willingness to make monstrous calculations.
The willingness to make monstrous calculations. My sense is that is kind of a narcissistic tendency. People who really desperately...
We hold the fate of humanity in our hands.
Exactly. And they really don't. And we'll talk about this a little bit, I think, in our news roundup today. But there's something flattering to them about thinking that the stakes are so high. Maybe they will be one day. I genuinely don't think they're existential. I think they're existential in the other sense, in the philosophical sense of what capabilities, what we talked about with Yuval Levine to some extent, what capabilities we take seriously, asking ourselves whether there's a de-skilling with AI of some capabilities or some relational capacities that we take seriously. But that's not end of the world, at least not by a bang kind of conversation. They do love to think that.
I think before we get into artificial intelligence, I think there's a more proximate technology question, which is the principal controversy that has come out of the film with the U.S. military, is that there's the figure of 63% success rate with 61% success rate with the interceptors, the GBIs, ground-based interceptors. And that's based on an average of all the tests that have been done since the 90s. And the test that was done in 2019 and the tests that were done in 2022, I think, those two tests were 100% successful. And so the military claims they've perfected it, it's 100% successful, whatever that means. But I think even if you think it's successful, 100% successful in the fog of war, the exigencies of the moment, we have to assume that there's not going to be 100% success.
Also, you're the statistician. The decision to count the last 3 times when you had 100% success as your track record, rather than the last 50 times when you did.
Well, I watched, here's the irony of our political situation. I watched last night, the most informative review of this movie was by the Center for Strategic and International Studies. And they had 3 people who had actually been in these rooms and actually participated in these conversations. And they had a lot of quibbles with, it's like, why did you only fire 2 when you had 17 to fire? If it's a nuclear weapon headed to the United States, you're going to fire more than 2. You could have fired more after you missed. There's apparently also interceptors in Pasadena. And it all is relevant to the discussion of the fact that the military had started under Biden to update the interceptor program so that we're going to have multi-layered interceptors, space-based sensors, space-based interceptors by 2028. So this is old. What they were describing there was old technology, improperly used, and not even to the full capacity of the situation.
It's interesting. I mean, even in fairness to the movie, they kind of addressed that and said, we don't know if this is a one-off or the beginning of a salvo. We don't have endless amounts of interceptors, so we have to engage a sort of in an economy of munitions. And, part of what that highlights is, in some sense, this is a set of common sense decisions that aren't necessarily military decisions. Like, it's not like your expertise as a general is going to help you figure out, am I going to fire everything I have because I think this one is the main threat, or am I going to hold some back? That's kind of a dispositional decision more than anything else, especially when you're operating in 18 minutes and in the fog of war, and your intelligence just missed the launch in the first place.
Well, the intelligence missing, I think, was another thing that really irked the people who have been in the room, because they said that's like a 1% scenario in some of their minds that you would not know who shot it and why. And that most of the scenarios are you're in a conflict with North Korea for months. They're saying, I'm going to shoot at you. They start firing some test missiles. You know exactly who shot it. Yeah. And the fact that there would be the space-based satellite failure. Now, space-based satellite failure, they also attribute to cyber warfare, which in that circumstance, if you had any indication that you had been hacked, your satellites had been hacked as a part of this, then that would escalate it immediately.
Well, let me give you an analogy. If you had a movie about October 7th-like events in Israel on September 7th, and then you asked the military brass what they thought about it, They would all say, this is absurd, this could never happen. The likelihood that we would miss these kind of things and misinterpret the data is, unconceivable, blah, blah, blah. Same with September 11th. So the movie is a sort of Black Swan event movie.
Right.
But Black Swan events are the ones that change our lives.
Yeah. And without too many, she spilled her coffee on her computer, or,
Right.
Wild things. It's just, you only have, and the fact that they had not even 20 minutes to make these decisions, that was very clear in the film. But in reality, a Russian sub could be off the coast of California.
That's
and
right.
It would be 7 minutes.
And then your interceptors don't help you in the first place.
Right.
Or a dude could walk off an airplane with a suitcase with a dirty bomb.
The new interceptor program is intended for scenarios like that, to around the entire border of the United States. But
it's not foolproof.
And I think that there's an interesting question about this whole. I mean, I understand why people get furious at the notion that we're going to spend a lot of money to prepare for this scenario instead of trying to wind things down. And I think that's a larger ethical question. Is like, why are we headed this way?
Yeah, but let's go back and look at some of the questions systematically. So to me, one of the first questions that Bigelow's movie raises, A House of Dynamite, is the question of trust and competence in our decision maker, in our decision makers. So the movie shows a sort of very ordered and thoughtful procedure, and it shows competent people doing a real effort, a serious effort, deciding in a matter-of-fact kind of way. There's some limited meltdowns, but, nothing more than you would expect under the circumstances. And it's hard to sort of miss the subtext of comparison with the current government, I thought at least, where you have sort of, fat-shaming Pete Hegseth and our dancing president. And I know it's not a political podcast, but I think it's very relevant to the movie. So part of me thought, I had two contradictory thoughts here, and I'm curious to get your input. Part of me thought, oh my God, what if, the current crew was, making those decisions, and the level of at least seriousness and commitment, at least from those two, the president and Hegseth, seems to be in question, shall we say.
Yeah. I thought Idris Elba, by the way, he did a good job of portraying a guy who was on his last legs, basically.
He was exhausted.
Yeah, and he's wheezing, and it's like that what reminded me of a kind of Kennedy scenario. The guy's hopped up on painkillers and can barely think straight.
And in fairness, even the most competent and decent of presidents would be exhausted almost by definition. So, I think part of it was meant to, sort of, I'm pretty sure part of the movie was meant to throw up those kind of questions. Do you trust the people who are in office to operate under those kind of conditions? But my other contradictory thought was, if you have 18 minutes, it might be just as well to have a president like a Trump who operates, from the gut. Part of what was clear in this movie is that given the time window and the pressures, the procedures were, I guess, good to have, but the president had never practiced them. Only the people who didn't have to make the decision were practiced in doing them. He didn't have time to look through his folders. So maybe, I'm just thinking, with all my criticism, for example, again, an analogy of Trump, he's the one who got something finally moving on Gaza because of a kind of gut-oriented decision-making structure. Reagan and his gut-oriented decision-making structure got some move on arms control. So I wasn't sure what conclusion I drew from the kind of analogy that the movie suggested. What about you?
Well, I certainly didn't go in the direction of maybe we just need an impulsive leader in the role. I think it's probably
common sense
fair.
Wouldn't save us under these circumstances. That was the thing I was most anxious about in this movie. That's why I would turn it off in an airplane.
I think it's clear that most presidents have not been sitting around wargaming in the way that they could have prepared for that moment, and that there would be that moment of oh my God, what are you trying to tell me now? At that when he opens the football But everybody around them has been wargaming. Everybody around them has gone through every month or every 2 months or something an exercise in exactly what to do in these scenarios, including the guys. There's a scene of a soldier who, when they miss at that base, he goes out and throws up and leaves his station. And some of the military people that responded to this said they wouldn't leave their station. In the first place, they might be in the midst of a nuclear war. And they are the front line. So
yeah.
why would they be leaving the station?
Yeah.
So, yeah, I think, there's...
I mean, it's a movie. Someone has to throw up once in a while.
Right, exactly. And I'm sure people would throw up, but probably in the waste can instead of outside. But so I think we have to assume that everybody around them is going to be well prepared for contingencies, but then fog of war, et cetera, et cetera. But in terms of the contingency, it was interesting. I think there was also some debate about how cut and dried and cookie cutter menu the contingencies were that he was offered, the rare, medium, and well done options of nuclearing the entire planet versus a limited strike against Pyongyang.
Yeah.
But there was no discussion of the fact there was no one to hit, which was because they didn't know and have what they call, by the way, dual phenomenology, which I think is fascinating. You needed two pieces of evidence to conclude that it had actually come from a particular place. So like just coming from a place where you thought there might be a sub of one particular country, that's not enough to say that country fired it. But anyway, they didn't have the dual phenomenology on who shot it. And so who's he going to respond to? And the kid who's sitting with him says, "Oh, I think you should just nuke everybody so that we don't have to do this again." It's like, yeah, because we'll all be dead.
Yeah. I mean, on that point of everybody around was carefully prepared. Yes, but the movie made quite clear that in the end, it's one person that makes the decision. That person wasn't prepared. And in fact, you can kind of understand why that person wasn't prepared, because in an everyday life of a president, that's like, he's too busy to kind of participate in these relatively, on an everyday level, abstract exercises. Right. Now, does that mean... He
says he's war-gamed Supreme Court nominations 10 times more than...
Yeah. And in a way, that's unforgivable if there's actually a nuclear attack, but in a way, that makes perfect sense. And so he's not prepared. And it raises the question, should this be... I mean, that point was correct in the movie. This is one man's decision, one person's decision right now. Should it be one person's decision?
Right. So the direction I go with that is we need better command and control that is better informed at that moment and that can respond in the time frame. And that probably has to be algorithmic, right? So all the wargaming that everybody's doing can be put into rules. And those rules can be put into a machine. And then we get back to Dr. Strangelove.
Yeah,
We've got a machine.
I didn't know if you're Dr. Hughes or Dr. Strangelove.
Well, I am Dr. Strangelove in that I would rather, given this movie, I would rather there be a machine willing to make the decision, do we sacrifice Cleveland or Des Moines? I wouldn't want the president to be sitting there sweating bullets trying to make that decision.
Well, I was going to ask you, is this better by committee or by one person? Of course, you answer it's better by machine.
That's right.
But
what committee?
Yeah.
You think you're going to call Congress into session in 18 minutes?
No, God help us, no. So I thought that it's appropriate for the president to make it, which kind of takes me back to, I think, probably under the circumstances, the gut is just as well as competence and carefulness. And you're like, well, why not replace it with a machine? Well, but even in terms, there were some non-reducible options. I mean, I would rather if the world ended that a human being ended it than a machine, because I'm not sure that the chances are improved by machine, but that's separate and we won't agree on that. But there were some irreducible options there. So, for example, the two options were, the general saying, let's strike preemptively while we still have the ability to do so. And that means we just lose Chicago. He says that's an incredible thing that I say when I didn't think about it when I got up to go to work that I'd say that. But fine, let's just lose Chicago and make sure that we destroy the rest of our enemies while we still can, because soon we won't be able to. Versus the young official from, I forget what agency, the deputy there, I forget what agency he was from, But he was sort of the voice of moderation. The general, by the way, was exactly like Curtis LeMay in in the Cuban Missile Crisis.
He doesn't start it.
Yeah.
He doesn't start the war, but
right.
Yeah, and the military folks that I saw respond to that, they said he would never have said those things. It's like, well, Mr. President, you should really be nuking these people. He said, these are your options here.
Yeah, I mean, he said those were his options, but he strongly, I mean, it really is, with all the preparations, the military people kind of say what military people are going to say. This general said what LeMay said in the 60s, which is nuke him while we still can. And then the deputy from the agency that we're too senile to remember what it's called said, we're set up to observe a first strike. At this point, we might as well wait, because that we can't stop that missile. We might as well wait a little longer to figure out what to do. Now, I'm not sure that a machine can make a more useful decision between those two options than a human can.
Yeah, I didn't understand the timing of the second strike question there, because if the missile lands on Chicago and it's a dud, then great.
Yeah.
If it lands on Chicago and Chicago's nuked, then you have at least 18 minutes to determine whether more missiles are incoming, and you can launch whatever you felt you needed to launch. And hopefully those more missiles incoming would tell you who to actually launch at. So It's like, if we had gotten another 18 minutes, I feel like we would have had an actual movie here, but so far it was...
Yeah, I mean, it was a philosophical movie in some basic sense. It was almost like a thought experiment trying to throw up the question. And the next question it threw up, which you alluded to, is, given what we've seen, what is the best way to keep ourselves safe? So, Trump has been starting to talk about Golden Dome, which is code for investing a lot more money in missile defense. By the way, the Israelis did very well with their missile defense in the war with Iran, more like in the high 80s, low 90%. But even there was massive damage from the few missiles that did get in. And I'm not an expert, but I'm assuming it's harder to shoot down faster moving nuclear munitions, ICBMs, than what they dealt with.
And they're coming in a lot higher.
But really, so the options are how best to defend ourselves. So one is missile defense.
$175 billion in the next 3 years for Golden Dome.
Exactly. The other is to re-engage in the sort of non-proliferation talks that Reagan stepped up in the 80s. And then a third would be to engage in some kind of dramatic public diplomacy efforts. Interestingly, Stimson, the Secretary of War, right after when it was last time it was called he was called the Secretary of War in 1946. Henry Stimson, who oversaw the bombing of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, when he retired, he presented Truman with a memo that said we should share the nuclear secrets with the Russians, and that would be the way to kind of guarantee greater security. And all the hawks in the cabinet said, how the fuck are you going to trust Stalin? He's insane. And his famous answer in that memo was that the only way to make an untrustworthy person trustworthy is to trust them. So that sounds, very much like a sort of religious leap of faith as nuclear strategy. So those are the three options that I see. They're not mutually exclusive. An exclusive focus on missile defense seems to be silly because of what you said earlier. You could kind of get around it by firing the missiles from a sub close to the coast or by trying to smuggle in munitions. It's just not foolproof. What's your sense of?
Well, the arms race in cyber interference and other technologies means that probably there will be workarounds to whatever defense we put up. So it's going to continue to be an arms race.
Right.
Yeah.
But what's your sense of that question that the movie raises, namely, what's the best way to keep ourselves safe?
Well, of course, I believe in the long run that what we should have been doing was moving more towards a regime of global nuclear disarmament and assured non-proliferation. And we haven't done that very effectively. And now Trump's blown up our capacity or our apparent interest in having those kinds of solutions, although he could change his mind tomorrow and he probably would be given some pats on the back by people. So I do think we should be moving that direction, but it's the geopolitical context is always the catch point there. It's like, can you trust in the Cold War situation? Can you trust China now? Can you trust North Korea and Iran? And of course, we just flattened, what we thought was the nuclear weapons facilities in Iran, and we may have only set them back a couple months. So the use of force in trying to enforce nonproliferation and international nuclear agreements doesn't seem to be working very well, and proliferation seems to be proceeding, and at least in places like Iran.
Yeah. The weird thing about Trump is he, in his bizarre way, is doing 2 out of those 3. So he is at least making signs of investing in missile defense.
Yeah.
And he's doing the dramatic gesture-based diplomacy thing that Stimson, in his much more sane way, talked about, right? But he's going to say, yeah, of course I'll go talk to Kim. Of course I'll go talk to Putin, which Biden would have sort of been appalled by about these things specifically.
Yeah, but do you actually think, not all of his international diplomacy has been for show, right? It's never actually produced any significant, his negotiations with Putin have produced nothing.
Well, in Gaza it did. And with Putin, it might. I don't know. It's looking far less promising. I agree that they've been for show, and not much for show. Just looking at it, I think show and sometimes results are not necessarily mutually exclusive. I have no, I'm a Burkean. I believe in institutions. I believe in impersonal, structures of negotiations. But I can't help notice, for example, that narcissistic showboat approach did something, for example, in Gaza that the other approaches didn't. And I don't know, that registers with me in this context.
Well, I'm always willing to give Trump the backhanded compliment that he has inspired Europe to finally take its own defense seriously and build its own capabilities. France is in negotiation with the rest of NATO about putting its nukes on the table as a defense if the United States was not willing to come to the nuclear defense of Europe with Russia. So it certainly has, Trump has changed the conversation in some positive ways, but...
Yeah. Another sort of perennial strategic issue that the movie reminded me of, especially when you reflect in conjunction about the war in Ukraine, is this relationship between having a nuclear bomb or a nuclear arsenal and the question of appeasement. So appeasement after World War II became the cardinal sin in international relations, right? Whenever you wanted to mock a leader, you would sort of pan back at that video of Chamberlain coming back from Munich in 1938 with this...
lasting peace in our time.
Yeah, with this piece of paper with Herr Hitler's signature, and the idea was, you can't let bullies get away with bullying in international relations because their bullying is insatiable, and that was...
And Putin is the chief nuclear arms saber rattler of the world.
That's right. But
I guess North Korea, it's a tie between North Korea and...
Right, except that even though North Korea has been aggressive vis-a-vis the South, Putin obviously has been more concretely and more extensively aggressive. What I'm saying is this: minus the nuclear weapons, Putin's complete disdain and dismissal for the international legal order and the invasion of Ukraine would have met with a much stronger pushback. Now everybody is sort of trying, the Trump administration just as much as the Biden administration, to kind of find a balance between helping the Ukrainians a little bit or a lot bit and not pissing off Putin too much. And so everybody is basically appeasing the bully. And one interesting result of the nuclear order has been that the question of appeasement is largely out the window, my sense is. Oh.
Well, this is another point about the movie, is that the kind of geopolitical situation and intelligence assessments were just taken off the table because they had no information about where this missile was coming from, who shot it. But in most scenarios, you would at least be discussing the likelihoods, what the chatter was from these different countries and who actually sent it. So
Yeah.
I think, and that's relevant, I think, to the responses, which is that I think there was pushback from military people that, look, the thing that you're going to say to the president isn't just you have to pick medium, rare, or well done. It's that you could also just invade a country and say, or do a limited missile strike that was non-nuclear that would take out command and control and then invade. Or, there are multiple options. We have cyber warfare options now. We could shut down countries or, limited assassinations using our intelligence assets or whatever.
Right. But all of that seems to be preemptive. I mean, my sense is once a nuclear weapon has been launched at you, you're in a different world than you were before.
Well, even so, the options were not as cut and dried, I think. The pushback was, look, the president could do any or none of these things and something else.
Yeah. Another point that I thought was not so much salient in this movie, a lot more salient in a movie like The Day After, which again focuses on the day after, on the aftermath, is the fact that we don't have a very carefully worked out recovery plan in the event of a nuclear strike of whatever magnitude that we still survive somehow. And I heard an interview with a former national security advisor to several president, Richard Clarke, making this kind of point. So that we're so sort of fascinated by the nuclear exchange itself that the careful thinking about how you recover from this hasn't been done, which is not surprising to me.
Right. Well, that's what, again, back to Dr. Strangelove, the initial planning for post-nuclear war survival bunkers that different people would be in. That's the conclusion of Dr. Strangelove. And those bunkers were built and exist, and there's various facilities. And at the very end of this film, they show one of them.
Yeah.
So there is that kind of continuity of government planning, and they have the fully worked out, office spaces there.
Yeah, continuity of government there is, and there were some lessons learned in the aftermath of September 11th from that. By the way, September 11th protocols informed the making of this movie because it's the closest in some way that we got to this kind of catastrophe, although it's in a completely different magnitude. And I think people knew that, it wasn't a continent-ending event pretty quickly. They knew it wasn't nuclear pretty quickly. But yeah, government continuity, yes, but how to, plans for mass burial, plans for dealing with population-wide radiation sickness, plans for, millions of dehoused people, plans for emergency hospitals, plans for preventing looting and chaos. I'm not sure that that's as carefully worked out. Well,
apparently the Trump administration has determined that FEMA is unnecessary and the states can just pick up all the slack. So
right.
Not the federal government's responsibility as far as he's concerned.
Yeah. So that was part of why I kind of thought it's interesting to watch this movie in conjunction with The Day After, because The Day After sort of raised those other questions about how you begin even to think about recovering from something like this.
Yeah, well, I've given a lot of thought to that as a survivalist or person who has some survivalist inclinations, and my general conclusion is we're all screwed because there used to be a show on National Geographic called Doomsday Preppers, and the people that they would profile had all kinds of apocalyptic anxieties, including nuclear war. And they would assess them on the basis of how much water they had prepared and whether they had enough weapons and, all the different things that they needed. But most people were prepared for like 2 months of survival, 3 months of survival.
Yeah.
A post-nuclear war world is barbaric. So
yeah.
I don't know if preparation is really meaningful in that way.
Yeah. And I mean, the remarkable thing, and this movie did generate it kind of always annoys me when the policy conclusion is we have to have a conversation. I don't know. It's like one of my pet peeves on the one hand. On the other hand, this seems to be one of those contexts where you do have to have a conversation. And this movie generated that. It seems to have raised the profile. I mean, we're having this discussion on our ultra popular podcast right now, right? And
just to remind the listener, House of Dynamite, which is on Netflix and is an excellent watch for if you're interested in these kind of questions.
Yep. And if you want to email us about what it made you think about, the email is prostheticgods@gmail.com, and we promise to answer. Yeah. Should we transition to our I am curious to ask you about your survivalist strategies, but maybe we can keep that for the next podcast.
We should do one on that survivalism as a response to modern life.
Yeah, we promise that Prosthetic Gods will keep going. Jay and I from our basements, are well protected.
Solar powered microphones.
Our solar powered microphones. Yeah. So what's new and exciting in the world of tech policy, Jay?
Well, I wanted to bring up a couple things. One is that Anthropic has announced this week that they detected a state-sponsored cyber espionage campaign using their Claude tool, which was apparently fairly successful at infiltrating financial firms, government agencies, all kinds of things. So the headline that I'll be putting out in our notes is "The age of AI-powered cyber attacks is here." So that's one thing.
Did they say what state it was?
They did not in the reporting that I saw. But yeah, I'm sure
it's almost like covert advertising for Claude, right? Claude is so good. It's like with the nuclear point. Claude is so good that it can do cyber attacks. ChatGPT can't.
Well, apparently Claude, its business model is really enterprise licensing. So it's considered a more trustworthy AI tool than the Gemini and ChatGPT versions, certainly Grok. So it's interesting that they are on top of trying to protect against these kinds of uses. I don't know what you could do. You have to basically give it a national security consciousness of some kind, so it doesn't respond when the North Koreans ask for stuff or something.
Yeah.
But that's one thing. The announcement from Google that they're going to experiment with Project Suncatcher, which is to put data centers in space powered by nuclear power, as well as that they and others are looking at new designs for nuclear power that you could build right as a part of your data center, and it could be a self-powering data center. This kind of ramping up the discussion about ways of doing this in an ecologically friendly, safe way.
The ecologically friendly scenario is Elon's rockets on their way to Mars collide with Google's nuclear power stations in space.
Right.
Jesus.
Well, and it all is ignoring the fact that China is building out AI into everything, and they have dramatically expanded solar and wind. They have not been dramatically expanding nuclear, although they're also nuclear friendly. But if we wanted to go, if we thought we needed that kind of energy, then why are we shutting down all the incentives to do solar and wind, which are growing exponentially around the world?
And what's Google's thought about why they're doing this in space, given the relatively friendly environment for them doing it on Earth?
Well, there are two principal draws of doing this in orbit. One is the heat, which is that you need to, the biggest cost is the cooling of the tensor arrays as you're doing the training or serving the data. And so if you can get it into space is really, really cold. So, but there's been a problem in the past with the architecture of these things, because just being in space isn't the solution, because in order to get the heat out of the thing, you have to push it out. And so they had to figure out how to do an architecture that would use the natural advantage of space to cool these things down. And then the second thing is that you're up there next to, with unimpeded access to the sun, and they are going to put it in an orbit that is constantly exposed to sunlight. So that probably would be good ecologically, as long as it doesn't clutter up space. We are worried about space debris and things breaking apart and little bullets.
What could go wrong, as you guys like to say here?
Yeah, well, it's one of the things that people who are interested in space really worry about is you get all these asteroids, or you get all these satellites up there. If one whacks into another, we had some kind of conflict between us and China or somebody, and they started whacking our satellites. It breaks up into all these little pieces that are spinning around at 10,000 miles an hour. And anything else that you try to put into space will get hit by those, and it's all over.
Yep. So that's we're upping the cheerfulness level here after talking about nuclear Armageddon.
Okay, I'll just mention AI bubble is probably about to burst, and Peter Thiel has disinvested from NVIDIA, which people are thinking this is a sign. But we'll see. The bubbles are always about to burst.
AI bubble or chip bubble?
Well, at this point, they're pretty close to the same. If you've seen those charts of the mutual investment circle that these firms have with each other, they're all buying chips from NVIDIA, and NVIDIA is investing back in them. And so, But so we'll see. We'll keep, this is a story that will be ongoing. The AI
developing news.
But the last thing for a positive ending.
Yeah, fun
is
ending.
Yes. 3I Atlas was an asteroid that zoomed in over the summer. It was first noticed, zooming past Jupiter and then Mars, and went around
interstellar
the sun.
Asteroid.
An interstellar asteroid. And it zoomed around the sun, and there is an astronomer at Harvard named Avi Loeb, who, along with many, many other people, has been very interested in whether this asteroid would demonstrate any anomalous behaviors or characteristics that could be indicative of it being an artificially built, spacecraft of some kind. And Avi Loeb still holds out a candle for that possibility on the grounds that as it zipped around the sun, it burst out a bunch of stuff, more stuff than it was supposed to burst out, and stayed intact as an object and appeared to be moving in a direction that he didn't expect. Other people contest this, but I think it's fascinating that we should be looking at objects and asking as one question, could this be artificial?
Avi Loeb is essentially saying there's enough anomalies here that it's not impossible, even though it's quite unlikely that it's an artificial object. And is making, on the one hand, Avi Loeb is also the head of the Galileo project and has been for a while advocating for the investment in technology for following and detection of UAPs actually in close orbit or in our closer environment. So his argument is to use the best technology that we have to kind of investigate this question scientifically. The interesting thing about Loeb is he's making the kind of classical argument about science, namely that you have to apply the scientific method rather than sort of apply a snobbery that rules some discussions out of questions. And I have to say I have a lot of sympathy for that. It probably is an asteroid. I have to put my Mulder and Scully posters away. But shout out to Avi Loeb. I guess we'll get in trouble for this, but he makes a decent point about the scientific commitment.
There are paradigms in science, and one of the paradigms in astrophysics is that you don't talk about aliens.
Yeah,
So I agree. Let's puncture that.
Yeah, that's the paradigm, and also it doesn't help that all the universe's kooks on X are very excited by him,
right.
And have made by this, and are very happy that there's a credible Harvard scientist who wants to look into this. He's looking into it in very, very different ways than the kooks on X, or than Joe Rogan, whose podcast he's been on, and who just seems to agree with most of what people tell him.
Yeah.
But maybe we'll try to have Avi Loeb on. So if you're interested in that, send us an email to prostheticgods at gmail.com.
Yes.
And we'll ping him and see what he says.
Is that for this week? Good?
That's, from nuclear war to aliens, I think we've covered it. It's time to walk the dog.
Okay, the final comment here is that's why the aliens were coming was
Yeah.
to stop us from having a nuclear war.
Yeah, but they will collide with Google's nuclear stations.
That's right. Google, they're putting those up there to stop the
That's
aliens
right.
from stopping us from nuclear
That's our
war.
missile defense. They'll say, "Fuck these people."
Damn billionaires.
All right, Dr. Hughes.
Talk to you later, man.
Talk to you.